Okay, good morning. Thank you for helping with the computer, Larry. We're going to get right into it. As the kids are heading out to Sunday school, when you drive down the highway, you notice billboards on the highway, and you think to yourself, I think to myself, that's old technology. What do they still do these crazy billboards for, you know? Pretty annoying. You can't get away from them. See McDonald's. Technology behind billboards. Advertisement, whether you're looking at it or not, your brain picks it up. Your brain can process tons and tons of information. And the advertisers know this, and they play on it. They exploit it. That's why billboards are still a big deal today. They pay big money per month for a billboard. But the image on a billboard, it's better to have a picture than words. At 70 miles an hour, the words don't mean that much. But if it's a picture of a nice, juicy White Castle hamburger, Greg, or a sweating, cold can of Coke, the image invokes an emotional response. It's psychological, and it's unavoidable. And they know this. And so they spend big money on billboards. Remember that. Now, I'd like to call to your attention, Stephen Jay Gould was a big evolutionist in the 80s. He was the big name at that time. It says here, American paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and historian of science. He was one of the most influential and widely read authors of popular science of his generation. I want you to pay attention to what he said in his book. You ready? Listen to this. The iconography of persuasion strikes closer than words to the core of our being. Every demagogue, humorist, advertising executive has known and exploited the power of a well-chosen picture. And many of our evolutionary pictures are concepts masquerading as neutral depictions of nature. These are the most potent sources of conformity, since ideas passing as descriptions lead us to equate the tentative with the factual. Wow, big words. What is he saying? This is what he's really saying. A, pictures speak louder than words. Pictures are used to persuade the acceptance of ideas. And when pictures portray evolution as scientific fact, it most powerfully persuades people to believe evolution is true. That's what he said there. So the title of the sermon today is Billboards of Evolution, because this is what the atheistic evolutionary gathering has done. They've chosen to put pictures in our face, pictures that say it's scientific, it's true, without the science behind it. Title of the sermon is Billboards of Evolution. The purpose of the sermon today, especially for the young, that is where my heart is. That is where my passion is. But also for the older folks too. But I know we've got a number of people here going back to school, whether high school, college, or whatever, and you're going to be bombarded with evolutionary thought. I know, I was there. But I defended myself pretty well at Wayne State University. So I want to give you solid responses to the most often used depictions, these pictures, these billboards of evolution, the pictures that they use to portray evolution as proven science. I'm going to give you solid responses to these today. Now, if you want, you can take notes, but you don't have to because you can get this PowerPoint for free from Larry or from our website. What are these 6 billboards of evolution? First, there's the Haeckel's embryo drawings. Then the Miller-Urey experiment. Then the peppered moths photo. Vertebrate limb sketches. Geologic column charts. And what I call the granddaddy of them all, ape to human diagram. Okay? These 6 depictions serve as billboards of evolution with very little science behind them. But they're in your face and they persuade us to believe that evolution is true. Let's look at these. Haeckel's embryo drawings. Ernst Haeckel lived about the same time as Charles Darwin, and Haeckel loved the idea of evolution, and he also loved to draw. So he would draw pictures of evolution in action. So you see here in the upper left-hand corner of this drawing is an amoeba, and if you follow it to the right, the amoeba evolves into a bacteria, and if you follow it down, the next thing you know, it has evolved into a snake, into a shark, and then monkey, and then man. And he spent many hours drawing these kinds of things, whether it's true or not. He drew his famous Tree of Life, where he supposes all life came from a single ancestor at the base of the tree. Well, he also was one of the few to have a microscope. And what he did was he said, look, I'm going to prove to everyone evolution is true. I'm going to look at embryos through my microscope, and I'm going to draw for you the evolutionary stages that each embryo goes through. And what he did was he said, look, it doesn't matter whether you're a human or a pig or a fish. We all go through an evolution, a mini evolution, from the time we are first formed to the time we are grown. Now, if you look at the top row, all of the embryos are the same. By the time they form completely, we're totally different. So his point was, when I look through my microscope, we all come from the same thing. We're all the same. And we go through this mini evolution, and then we end up different. So evolution is true. The only problem is, here are his actual sketches. These are photographs of his sketches. That's not what he saw through the microscope. That's the problem. This is what he saw through the microscope. He lied. He saw these embryos for human, rabbit, chicken, etc., and he drew something completely different. He lied. Now, how many people's faith did he destroy because they accepted this as science? But it doesn't end there. You can pick up college textbooks. You can pick up high school textbooks. They still teach Haeckel's embryos today, some 130, 140 years later, proven fraud. They still teach it today. The concept is still, well, it's proven science. Prentice Hall. Still going on today. McGraw-Hill. This guy was daring enough to show the actual drawing. Okay? So this is a big problem. Actually, Douglas Futamaya got in big trouble for this. But it's proven fraud still going on 130 years later. So if you get into college and your biology teacher shows you a chart like this and says this is proof for evolution, or like my philosophy professor at Wayne State said, well, we know the Bible is wrong because of blah, 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 blah. Are there any Christians in the class? And I was the only one that raised my hand. If they do that to you, then you say, no, that is fraudulent, it's proven wrong, and it's one of Mr. Antos's billboards of evolution. Okay? Haeckel's embryos, fraudulent drawings. Okay? Let's look at the next one. The Miller-Urey experiment. Now, to understand this, you have to understand a little more history. So let me explain something to you. In 1818, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. We've all heard of Frankenstein, right? She wrote this in 1818, decades before Darwin wrote Origin of Species. She no doubt had impact, her idea of zapping, and by the way, Frankenstein is the one in the middle. Just want to. But the premise of Frankenstein is under certain laboratory conditions, you can zap non-life into life, right? Dr. Frankenstein raised the monster up to the ceiling, the lightning struck the lightning rod, and he zapped Frankenstein's monster to life from dead human parts. Well, Mary Shelley and this idea, she knew Charles Darwin's grandfather. And this idea persuaded those evolutionists, Huxley, Darwin, etc. So you come to 1950, and Stanley Miller and Harold Urey said, we've got all this cool technology now, why don't we do an experiment in the laboratory? We'll try to zap non-life into life. We will spontaneously generate life from nothing. So what they did was they had this laboratory, they had a power source, they had some chemicals, and they had it as a closed system, and they created a spark in some gases. There's only one problem. The laws of physics state, if you try to add energy to a system, it is always destructive, not constructive. Always. Let me give you an example. Let's say I have a dead battery, and I want to add energy to a dead system to bring it back to life. Can I do this? Can I take two wires, plug it into the outlet, and touch the battery? No. Because adding energy to a system is always destructive without a complex mechanism to harness the energy. So you have to use the proper mechanism to bring life back to a battery. Now let's take this to a greater scale. Okay, here we have a nuclear power plant. Okay. Adding energy to a system is always destructive without a complex mechanism to harness and control the energy. Anyone heard of the China syndrome? Okay, that's where a nuclear power plant has the potential to melt its way all the way to China without a complex mechanism to harness the energy. Some people will say, what about the sun's energy? Doesn't that give life? Well, think about it. The sun destroys things. It bakes things. It'll destroy your car, your upholstery, your paint job. The sun doesn't do good things when just something is left out in the sun. It'll bake the roof to your house. But the sun can bring life if there is a complex mechanism, say chlorophyll, to harness the energy and control it. Did you know one cell of chlorophyll is more complex than a city? Google it. But there are more problems with the Miller-Urey experiment. The first thing is that Miller, he stabilized this experiment in the laboratory. Well, that's not evolution. Evolution is supposed to be by random chance. Everything left all to its own in nature. He controlled this in a laboratory. He played God. He removed the oxygen so that his experiment wouldn't blow up. Well, I think there was oxygen in the earth when life began. That's cheating. He assumed no information, no photosynthesis, no DNA, etc. We know that our DNA is just like software. Our bodies are like the computer. Our DNA is like the software that runs the computer. You buy a laptop with no software, it's useless. You have to have the software. We need ourselves what to do. So he assumed no DNA, no photosynthesis, no information. Well, that's cheating. And then this experiment that they claim, it proves life began in the swamp by a lightning bolt. It only yielded 2% of the needed compounds for life. They're claiming victory way too soon here, folks. And then those resulting compounds were left-handed and right-handed. They're called amino acids. Now, in nature, they're only left-handed. That ought to speak volumes. Here's a picture of some of the amino acids. So, for example, a right-handed glove won't work on a left hand. So their experiment yielded right hand and left hand amino acids. Well, that's not necessary for life. That harms life. So the only thing that they truly demonstrated with this experiment is that life requires intelligent input, a creator. All you've done is proven to me that there was a God who did it. When you operate in a laboratory and you run around and make sure everything is just right, that you're proving to me that a God created us. Okay? Paul Davies, Australian Center for Astrobiology, he was described by the Washington Times as the best science writer on either side of the Atlantic. He said, nobody knows how lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. He's an evolutionist, and he's saying to his compatriots, guys, calm down here. We don't know. We do not know. He's one of the few honest ones. So the Miller-Urey experiment, it's a billboard for an intelligent designer, not evolution. Okay, so we see Haeckel's embryo drawings and the Miller-Urey experiment. Let's look at the peppered moths photo. Maybe some of us remember seeing this in our biology book in high school. The peppered moths photo. So it goes like this. They said, this is proof for evolution. When you have a trunk where the bark is dark colored, then a moth that is dark that lands on it won't be seen as easily by the birds and won't get eaten. But a white moth will get picked off easily. And then the converse, if you have a light-colored bark tree and a dark moth, he will get picked off by the bird easily, but a light-colored moth will not. So this speaks to evolution. See, survival of the fittest. Some of the moths will survive, some of the other ones won't. This is said to be the case in which evolutionary process has been observed. So what is the history behind this? So here are the original photographs, and I'll highlight the moths for you. So it was in the 1950s, Bernard Kettlewell theorized that colored moths on tree bark would prove Darwinian theory. So he ran some experiments and he took data, and then he produced these photographs with moths on the tree trunks, and even to this day, these photographs serve as so-called proof for evolution. Well, no one bothered to check his work. So for some 30 years until the 1980s, people just bought it. But then biologists said, let's try to recreate this thing. And they discovered that peppered moths, they don't cling to tree trunks. They hide on the bottom side of the tree branches higher up in the tree canopy. They're not stupid. They know birds will come after them. Bats eat moths more than birds do. Why? Because bats use echolocation. You can find a moth at night if you're a bat, and it doesn't matter what color the moth is. It could be a black moth on a black whatever, and you'll still find it using sonar. The truth is, finding black and white moths beside each other in a natural setting would have been almost impossible. So Kettlewell pinned dead moths to the tree trunks. The photo was staged, folks. Moth experts knew the photos were staged, but no textbook has ever disclosed this detail to its readers. Nevertheless, the pair of images seen here has become one of the most famous examples of evolution of all of science. These pictures have become a billboard for evolution. It's a picture that evokes a response, a psychological response in the minds of those who see it. Peppered moths photo. Now let's take a look at vertebrate limb sketches. Vertebrate limb sketches. So what they do is they will show a picture like this, and they'll say, look, it doesn't matter whether you're a turtle or a human or a horse, bird, bat, seal, whatever. It doesn't matter. We've all evolved from the same thing because look at the similarities. Look at the blue-colored bones. They are closest to the body of the animal. That's the humerus. Then the radius is always the next bone. And on down to the phalanges, the green-colored ones. We must have all come from the same bacteria. No, this is just faulty reasoning. This is just bad logic. Just because we have similarities doesn't mean that we evolved upward from a common ancestor, some bacteria. It's the other way around. Here, let me do those arrows for you again. It's the other way around. Everything points to a common designer. God did it. God created us with similarities. We have a common purpose, right? I mean, if you're in your kitchen, you wouldn't say, hey, look, the spatula has evolved into a spoon, which is going to evolve into a ladle. Isn't that amazing? No, these were created according to a common plan by a common designer. That's not proof for evolution. So similar vertebrate limbs. It's a billboard to faulty reasoning. So we got plenty of time here. A couple more. Geologic column charts. So you open a geology book and you see all these, wow, these are really amazing charts. They're really good looking. It's fascinating, all the different layers. Well, there are layers, that is true. But I had geology at Wayne State. I flipped to page 213. I couldn't believe my eyes. It said, how do we tell time geologically? In other words, how do we know that the earth is millions and millions of years old? Well, it says, well, first of all, no single place on earth contains all of the rock layers composing the entire geological record. What? It's nowhere on earth. It's only in the charts. This is the only place you will find the geologic column. It's taught to us, and these pictures evoke a response psychologically in our mind to believe evolution is true. But it's nowhere on earth. There are layers, but not like the chart says. The chart wants you to believe the more layers, the more years. Then I flip the page, and it says, okay, so how do we know how old the layers are? How do we know how old the fossils are? It says, knowing the spatial relationships between rock strata then helps geologists estimate the relative ages of the fossils contained in them, and vice versa. Knowledge of a fossil organism's place in the geological record can help date a rock. Did you hear what that just said? We date the fossils by the rock layers, and we date the rock layers by the fossils that are in them. Okay, do you know what that is called? That's called circular reasoning. Circular reasoning works because circular reasoning works because circular reasoning works, okay? I had logic at Wayne State. You could not do this in logic class, but they do it with evolution. We date the layers. We know the layers are millions of years old because of the fossils that are in those layers. Oh, great. Well, how do you know how old the fossils are? Oh, because of the layer that contains them. That is circular reasoning. My professor, I had Professor Furlong at Wayne State. I wrote this on the page of my textbook one day, and I put down the date. He said, lithology, in other words, the study of all the layers, lithography. Lithology commonly leads to the most mistakes because it is easy to confuse the dates. Yeah, when you use circular reasoning, sure. Listen to this guy. Niles Eldredge, big evolutionist. He said, paleontologists cannot operate this way. No way to simply look at a fossil and say how old it is unless you know the age of the rocks it comes from. And this poses something of a problem. If we date the rocks by their fossils, how can we then turn around and date the fossils by the rock layers? But this guy is a little more in your face about it. He says the intelligent layman has long suspected circular reasoning in the use of rocks to date fossils and fossils to date rocks. The geologist has never bothered to think of a good reply, feeling that explanations are not worth the trouble as long as the work brings the results intended. Nice. Is that science? No. So the geologic column, circular reasoning. So we've seen drawings, the Miller-Urey experiment, peppered moths photos, vertebrate limb sketches, the geologic column charts, and there are many more. I just picked the 6 that I feel are the most prominent, that our college students will see the most. But it's not just college students. A lot of us adults, we get into discussions about God when we're at work, or you might bump into a salesperson at the store or what have you. And what I find, this is what happens to me. They will say something, and I'll say to myself, oh man, what was the answer to that? The geologic column chart thing. Oh, you have to kind of stay on top of it so that you're ready. We're told to be ready to give an answer with meekness and with fear, right? So let's look at the last one. I call this one the granddaddy of them all. This one has been around since I was a little kid. I had to ask my parents, why are those monkeys and men walking around together? It's the ape to human diagram. Now, they're getting more sophisticated in their illustrations. They're coming up with some new ones. They look better. Wow, isn't that cool? Look, he's kind of fading from monkey to man. Isn't that neat? Okay, the problem with this sketch is there is no science behind it. It is a sketch. This is the granddaddy of them all. There's no science behind this, but it is a picture. It's put on a billboard in our minds, and it's psychologically, our minds conform to this idea of monkey to man. Even Darwin said in 1959, when he wrote Origin of Species, this is in Origin of Species, he said, but if species have descended from other species, why do we not everywhere see innumerable transitional forms? The bones. Great question, Charlie. You see, there is no missing link. All we have are bones and bones of humans. There are no bones of all of the innumerable transitional forms in between. Oh, now they will find a bone, and they'll use a pig tooth. Piltdown man, they found a pig's tooth, and they said, it's the missing link. And then they formed a skeleton all around the pig's tooth. And then they found out later that the tooth had been dipped in acid, and they used a little bit of wood stain on it to make it look old. It was a fraud. Piltdown man is a total fraud. And there are many others. It's called Evolution's Hall of Shame. All of the fraudulent bones that they claim are the all we have are bones of humans. And I agree with Charles Darwin. Where are the innumerable bones of the transitional ones? There should be far, far, far more bones of the in-between, shouldn't there? And there is nothing. Nothing. There's no science. So you see, there is no missing link. The whole chain is missing. And there's no science at all behind the ape to human diagram. It is just another billboard of evolution. just bones of contention. Huh. Okay, so we have plenty of time. Looks like we're going to end a little bit early. Again, if you would like this PowerPoint, you can talk to Larry or Jake or Brad, or I think you can just get it off the website. But you may want it as you're heading back into school or what have you. So we see these billboards of evolution, Haeckel's embryo drawings, the Miller-Urey experiment, the pepper moth's photo. There's no science behind any of this stuff, guys. But these images are thrust in our face because the science is not there. And it's a psychological game. They go, see, it's science because we're showing you a picture. Remember what Stephen Jay Gould said at the beginning of this presentation. We know that pictures evoke a psychological response. So that's why we use pictures to convince people of evolution. So I hope this sermon, this message, gives solid responses to often used depictions which portray evolution as proven science. All right. So we're going to wrap up a little early here. I'm going to close this in prayer, and we're 10 minutes early. And then I hope you have a nice afternoon with your loved ones. Let's close in prayer. Father, I'm sorry that I didn't go to your word today, Lord, but I really feel strongly that our youth is going to be bombarded, and they're going to feel the pressure in college to believe this theory of evolution. And we would just ask that we would give our young the tools and the right humility to read the Word and to study science. Study it, but also to be able to rightly divide what is truth and what is not. I hope that today's message would help our youth to be willing to look at things and understand them for all that they are worth. As we go today, I just ask that you'd give us safety to return home, but also to rest up for the work week and to think about these things. What are we doing with our lives? And who do we support? Which side are we going to take in this world? Help us all, young and old, to weigh these things out in our minds and in our hearts, we ask. As we pray this in Jesus' name, amen.